Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Back in History sets out to preserve historical facts in contemporary digital forms for the benefit of today and the benefit of tomorrow. In this edition, we bring to you the vast, unquantifiable riches of the African continent. There are 7 continents in the world, namely Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, and Australia. Each of these continents is rich in its own right and on various indices. Some are more developed than the others, some are richer in GDP than the others, and some are richer in human and natural resources than the others. As a matter of fact, no continent is the same. As regards natural resources, Africa is one of the richest continents. Some persons have even described Africa as the richest continent in the world. But here are some interesting facts about the magnitude of wealth in Africa. As of 2021, the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country in Africa, was the largest producer of copper in Africa, followed by Zambia. Copper conducts both heat and electricity and can be drawn into wires, and copper is thus very significant in the making of electrical equipment such as wiring and motors. South Africa is the largest producer of coal in Africa, producing over 250 million tons every year. It is important to note that over 75% of South Africa's coal is used domestically to serve the energy needs of the country. South Africa is also the largest producer of steel and sugar in the whole of Africa. South Africa produces the largest amount of salt in Africa. South Africa also produces the largest quantity of wine in Africa, consumed in Africa and also exported abroad. South Africa is also the largest producer of platinum in Africa. Now, Botswana is the largest producer of diamond in Africa, producing millions of carats of diamond every year. Ghana is the largest producer of gold in Africa. Gold has been in Ghana since creation, and when the colonial forces came to Africa, Ghana was even described as the Gold Coast. Other countries in Africa also have deposits of gold. As of 2022, Nigeria was the largest producer of rice in Africa, followed by Egypt. Nigeria is also the largest producer of rich green vegetable leaves in Africa. Nigeria is also the largest producer of yam tubers, maize, cassava, catfish, groundnuts, peanuts, and palm oil. These items are produced in commercial quantity for domestic use and for exports. Nigeria is also the largest producer of crude oil in Africa, followed by Libya and Angola. Crude oil is the mainstay of Nigeria's economy, and every year's budget since about 1963 is predicated on revenue projections from oil. Nigeria also has the largest natural gas reserves on the continent of Africa. The largest producer of cotton in Africa is Benin Republic, while the largest producer of tea is Kenya. Kenya is also reputed as the largest producer of milk in Africa. Kenya is also the largest producer of flour. The largest producer of cocoa in Africa and the world is Ivory Coast. No other country has beaten this record. The largest producer of music in Africa is Nigeria, with the likes of Davido, P-Square, Wizkid, Two-Face, D'banj, Burna Boy, Sikiru Adepoju, Femi Kuti, and many others producing several music renditions for domestic consumption and for exports. Nigeria is also the largest film producer in Africa. Ethiopia is the largest coffee producer in Africa and also doubles as the largest cow producer. Ethiopia is also the largest producer of honey in Africa. Ethiopia is also the largest producer of fish, while Tanzania is the largest producer of cashew. Africa is also rich in water resources. As a matter of fact, Africa offers so much to the global maritime economy and transportation, with massive seaports and huge volumes of water surrounding the continent and emptying into the Atlantic. In these volumes of water, there are different species of aquatic life and uncountable natural resources. There are many other countries in Africa that boast of one precious natural resource or the other. When you talk about human capital resources, Africa is also at the top of the chart. Africans are all over the world performing creditably and competing favorably with others in all spheres of life. There is virtually no field of endeavor that you don't find Africans at their best. Africa is thus a richly blessed continent. But the saddest part of Africa's story is the lack of the willpower to translate these natural resources to wealth for its teeming population and for exports. For instance, Nigeria is the largest producer of oil and gas in Africa and has been drilling oil in commercial quantity since about 1958, when oil was first discovered in Aloibiri in present-day Bayelsa State. But it would shock you to note that till this day, Nigeria does not have functional refineries that can refine its crude for domestic use and exports. Nigeria spends trillions of dollars every year to export its crude for refining in other countries. When this is done, the refined product is then imported back to Nigeria for domestic use. This is an irony that many find difficult to comprehend. In other parts of Africa, like the DR Congo, Liberia and others, natural resources have become the reason for bloody wars, with scores of citizens killed and properties destroyed. Corruption and looting of these resources is also a major setback to the desire to transform the fortunes of Africa with these uncountable natural resources. On 21st June 2016, Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, himself a son of Africa from Ghana, while addressing a gathering in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, on the topic, quote, "Building stronger economies and communities in Africa," had this to say, unquote, "Our continent is generally heading in the right direction, yet progress has been far from even. Millions of people still live in abject poverty and hunger and are threatened by conflict, instability, and disease. Inequality is growing and widening the gap between the richest and the poorest. The lack of democratic, transparent, and inclusive governance undermines citizens' rights and investor confidence. Today, I will highlight 3 critical areas where joint actions is urgently needed to build stronger economies and communities in Africa and beyond. First, I believe that we have to transform African agriculture and food systems. In sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 4 people are still chronically short of food, and millions more lack the rights to nutrition for proper health and development. Without action, climate change and demographic growth means that these numbers will only get worse. Despite having unrivaled agricultural potential, which could transform Africa into a surplus exporter, Africa, in fact, spends around $35 billion every year importing food. One option for unlocking the potential is by treating African agriculture as a business and enabling the private sector to intervene and invest along with governments. This requires governments to put in place appropriate policies and regulations, strengthening institutions, and investing in infrastructure. In his concluding remark, Kofi Annan went on to say, unquote, "Finally, I would urge political and business leaders alike to invest in Africa's youth and women, harnessing their talent and creativity. A skilled and knowledgeable workforce is crucial for the long-term success of business and society as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, I recognize that this is an ambitious agenda. There are many challenges to overcome, but building stronger economies and communities in Africa is possible. Sustained and bold leadership from every sector is required. We have the expertise, the technologies, and the evidence needed to succeed. Let us all, business, the public sector, and civil society, live up to this responsibility. I have often said that healthy and prosperous societies are built on three pillars: peace and security, inclusive development, and the rule of law and respect for human rights. There can be no long-term peace and security without development. There can be no long-term development without peace and security. And no society can long prosper without respect for the rule of law and human rights. So, let us turn aspiration into action and build a peaceful and prosperous Africa founded on these pillars of progress." End of quote. Till this day, Africa is still the beautiful bride of the world, with several countries running their factories and economies from the resources which they source daily from Africa. Africa was also the beautiful bride of the colonial forces who defied the odds to remain in Africa for several years and exploited its resources to sustain the Industrial Revolution that took place in Europe. Car manufacturing companies in Europe, America, and Asia source most of their raw materials needed for car production from Africa till today. Phone manufacturing companies also source some raw materials from Africa till today. The usefulness of Africa's natural resources to the economy of the world is unquantifiable. The time for Africa to rise and claim its pride of place and make effective use of its natural resources for the betterment of the lives of its people is long overdue. Many thanks for watching this episode of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel and follow the page for regular notifications on every new video.